innovators. I'm Todd Wyant, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and construction innovation adventure with a mission to propel this great industry forward. My guest today is Neil Wypior. He is a Managing Director of EVO-MEP with over 20 years of hands-on experience in the construction and prefabrication sector. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for waking up very early your time to make this episode work.
No problem at all. Yeah, I like to get in the office early before everyone else. It gives me a bit of free time to get things sorted before we roll into the day. So glad to be here.
Nice. Awesome. Well, I'd love to hear everybody's kind of backstory on how they got into the construction industry to begin with.
Sure. Yeah. My background is quite an interesting one. Obviously, as a youngster, I wanted to be a professional soccer player. And I did reach some good heights, but never really got past the academy stage. So my father turned around to me and said, look, if you're not going to go to university, then you need to learn a trade. So off I went to trade school at the age of 18, and then decided to go into the beautiful world of plumbing, and started out in the plumbing world and got exposed very early on to major construction sites, mainly high-rise residential. During my apprenticeship, also went through different places in the UK. That's where I'm originally from, and did experience some elements of prefabrication. There's a company called Crown House Technologies in the UK, and they were doing corridor modules in the 90s. So seeing how things were being done off-site at a very early age, which is quite strange considering how prefabrication is still being adopted today, so some 30 years later. However, that was my first insight into the world of prefabrication from my background, the plumbing background, and I started to try and adapt that to some of the sites that I was working on. So panelized systems with first fit out components on, commonly known as in the UK as utility cupboards now, or hooks, and that was my first exposure into that work of prefabrication. And then I very quickly moved into project management in facilitating more of this offsite manufacturing. Had a very small workshop for the plumbing company that I worked for, building components and sub-assemblies as such for prefabrication. And then it rolled on from there into making bigger things, bigger pipe work, bigger systems, getting involved in design stage because I was from site, so getting involved more in the design engineering stage so that I knew what could and couldn't work. And yeah, my career progressed from there into, I've done manufactured them bathroom pods, worked for pod manufacturers in the UK, managed accounts for volumetric and modular builders in the UK. And then 11 years ago, I moved out to Australia, again, working very heavily in the mechanical sector. HVAC and mechanical has always been a big sector that I progressed into from my plumbing background, and do pump skids and multi-service risers and corridor modules. So yeah, moved out to Australia 11 years ago. The Australian market wasn't really ready for prefabrication. There was elements of it, but it was still very much in its infancy. Went back to the UK in 2016 and took over the biggest prefabrication facility in Europe at that time, for several years. And then 2018, I come back to Australia and thought, right, I've done really good in setting other prefabrication businesses up and factories up, and making it work. And the only way I'm going to make it work here in Australia is to do it myself. So I started contracting, set up a few prefabrication businesses for businesses that were looking to get into prefabrication. And then in February 2020, just before COVID, a great timing, we looked into going more into the Melbourne market. So we opened our factory in April 2021 in Melbourne, and had great success ever since. And we've completed some really iconic projects with our client base. So yeah, that's a snapshot of my journey so far.
That's awesome. Thanks for going through that. So I want to go back to the early days of the kind of deciding between trade school and university. That's a topic that has popped up a lot in recent episodes, is that kind of that crossroad and deciding between one or the other, and kind of weighing the pros and cons, and really kind of getting the message of trade school out to audiences that don't really think about trade school. So when you were kind of weighing that decision, what tipped the scales in favor of trade school?
There was two big factors for me. One, I wasn't a big fan of school, or the actual school system. I thought it was very regimented, and very one-directional as regards the education system of the core subjects. One of the biggest things that I enjoyed during my high school years, but I only did it for the first 3 years, was shop, woodwork, metalwork, and mechanics. But then comes halfway through my high school years that those options get taken away, and you still have to do the core subjects. So it kind of took away my creativity. I've always been a person that's used my hands a lot. So when it comes to deciding where I wanted to go, trade school sort of created that creativity, and that self-thinking and that self-awareness for me to be able to problem solve for myself. Whereas doing exams and doing papers, it's like, no, there's only one right answer, and you're very isolated. You have to learn yourself, revise yourself, do exams by yourself. Whereas I wanted to be in an environment where there was other people around me, and we were all trying to working towards the same thing. So when I've seen some of the workshops that are very team-led, and team incentivized, that was it for me. So it was an easy decision to make. I just wish, that trade school was actually part of the mainstream school system, because I think we'd get more people into the industry if we actually incentivized it and had it earlier on in the education system.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that getting that hands-on experience is a huge importance to expose people to what the industry is. And I know growing up, there was not a shop class at my high school. So it was, I obviously knew what shop class was and knew that it existed, but we never had hands-on exposure. Trade school was never a thing that people were even talking about. So I think being able to go into those schools and show it is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is huge for the industry as regards being able to get people adopted early, and in that mindset of going further in their education in a trade school. But the one thing I do say about the educational system is it very much, even through elementary and a high school, our creativity is kind of taken away from us. Young children, you see them come home with young, pretty drawings. My son's 7-8 year old comes home with all these beautiful things, but you can see as the years progress that those creativity pieces actually reduce massively, because they're so regimented in doing the core subjects, and it's a shame to see that creativity disappear. So yeah, the core subjects are very antiquated. It's an old Victorian system, and it hasn't changed. So, and then people feel the need to do further education to get a job, and further education. I have 2 older sons who are both at university age, and even then, it's you finish school, you get a job. You finish high school, you get a job. You finish university, you get a job. Now it's, I've got to keep learning and getting qualifications to be considered. And now we're starting to see an industry change where some people are going into creative jobs in some mega tech companies, and they haven't finished university, or they haven't been to university. I use an expression, they're QBE, they're qualified by experience. I went to trade school. I work in a massive world of HVAC and mechanical, across all services. I'm not an engineer, yet I sit with engineers, I have good conversations with engineers, and I've physically built thousands of different skids and modules. So I can draw a skid and module, and I know that it would be, structurally sound, because I've built so many of them. and been there. And so I understand the principles, but I'm not an engineer. And when people have interviewed me and they say, "Oh, have you got a bachelor in engineering?" I said, "No, I'm QBE, I'm qualified by experience." So I have engineers, I have that part of the business to certify stuff, but it's very much down to that knowledge. And I am on a mission now to work with universities and colleges to get the mindset of prefabrication earlier into trade schools as well.
Yeah. Well, you have the head knowledge, which is important, but then you also have the experiential knowledge that is equally as important. I think we go askew when we start weighting kind of one more than the other. You need both. You need to know your facts and your figures there, and the math has to be sound. And Absolutely. You also have to have that experience knowledge. I mean, that's huge.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the other things that, people coming out of university, I have engineers and postgrads that have come and worked for me or continue to work for me. And while, like you say, that I can do the drawings and they can do the math and calculations, but how I got to that drawing and how I designed it or drew it the way that I said it can work, they're like, how did you get to that? How did you come up with this concept? Because of that physical experience isn't there. It takes time and it is a journey. So yeah, that experience is key. But having it locked up in here, that's no use to anyone. I'm 42 in a couple of weeks' time. And I'm still relatively young in my career, but I've got a lot of experience, and having that locked away in my head. One, I owning and operating my own business is no good to anyone. I say many times, I'm the bottleneck in my business because a lot of what gets designed and engineered comes from me, the problem solver, because I've got a lot of experience. Now I've spent the last year documenting that and training people up and bringing them along that journey because we need to bring up that educational level. We need more people in the industry doing prefabrication. The only way of doing that is by teaching them. So I call it the 3 E's, which is educate, enable, and empower. So in order to get more people like myself out there, I've got to teach them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive into DfMA and kind of unpack the state of the industry so far. So from your vantage point, what really is the state of DfMA, and how does data really play into the whole concept?
Data for me carries a massive part, and that's become apparent over the last several years. Having 20 years of data, because I am that way inclined as regards recording everything. When in my early years, I did read things like the Toyota Way and the One Machine, it changed the world. And I did a lot of reading and researching it into the automotive industry as regards production, and then started recording my own data. So how long it would take to do a fitting. I was timing myself and timing others. But having data is one thing, but utilizing it and using it is another. So our last few appointments within our organization have been people from a software or a development background to help take that data and actually put it to use. So we have more people using software systems, whether it be an Autodesk product or other systems, to then it capture further data so that it becomes part of an ecosystem. So our estimators are estimating accurately, our workforce on the shop floor are working more accurately. So then obviously with our DfMA, we then we have a number of letters. We don't just use DfMA, so we have to think things for a building services perspective. When it comes to mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, we have to think about the logistics, the transport on site, the crane ability, the maintenance, the commissioning later on, the removal of services if things need to be changed out. So we have a number of different letters there as regards our pre-design consult internally. And it's all those considerations that then go part of that DfMA. When we actually build prefabricated skids or riser modules, no two are the same. In that big end of town where we talk about big skids, plant rooms, riser modules, they are all different. They are very bespoke in the sense of the services that run through them. We work with the design engineers and the contractors to coordinate them a little bit better. But as we all know, no two hospitals are ever built or designed the same. It's very much a blank piece of paper. So what we try and do is extract the data that we've used from systems before, when it comes to weight, when it comes to structure, and we've developed things like generative design. So if we are given a riser core, then we can basically generatively design a frame in system based on the parameters of that riser. So then that framework is then done. The engineer will, then obviously we put the weights in it, what components are, and then the engineer will sign off on it. So it eliminates a lot of the going back to the drawing board and sketching up and starting from scratch a framing system. And then it's about taking that data and saying, right, now what can we do to improve the manufacture of that framing system? Can we design a framing system, a modular framing system that we bring in, that we use within our model through that generative design? So then it's automatically being cut. So we have a rotary access laser that cuts steel pipe and tube. So and RHS and SHS. So we can then send that information to that machine, and it will cut all the holes in. It will cut all the angles, but it will also cut certain joints so that we can then assemble it, sub-assemble it without having to tack it. We can then just straight weld it. So there's certain elements we're looking at the end, and then bringing that data back to the beginning and making it part of our design principle.
So how are you marking the various elements and components and kind of flagging them in the system so that when you start a new project, you can go, oh, we've already done something similar to this, and we can mine that data from this previous project and this component and use it in this new project that we're working on now?
Yeah, so obviously that comes from the team insights. So any new projects that come up, basically we throw them up on our screens, and then we say, well, okay, we've got these are the components we're looking at on this job, and then it comes from the experience of the team. So right, okay, we have a multi-service riser. Yeah, it's these are the dimensions of it. It is similar to this job. We overlay it from previous jobs to see if that framing system will work and carry those weights. So we were only at the stage where we're using framing systems to overlay from previous jobs. And that helps with the engineering and the certification as well, because obviously going through that, if we subcontract out the structural and seismic certification for it, then obviously that can take time and cost a lot of money as well. So if we can drag on something that's been used previously, then that's what we do. And there might be small elemental changes to it, but it's very hard to standardize that big end of town. But we're working backwards so that we can look at sub-assemblies, so we can things like fan skids or chiller plant skids that we can standardize. Then that's what we're putting to our army now. So we are using standard platforms or standard skids that are transportable, and then work within the components and have secondary steels within there. So then we've already got these pre-designed, pre-certified, liftable, rated platforms or skids. So they already go in before we start looking at the internal components and the layouts of the plant skid. Yeah.
So one of the things that's really important right now is really getting that data synced, and the interoperability of everything, of different softwares and systems and components and all that stuff. And so the buzzword of connected construction, what does that look like to you, and how does that actually play out in the practical reality that we're in?
Well, the missing piece is something that we've had to develop ourselves internally as regards, from design stage when we're producing drawings for components that get made into a framing system and that then become something else. That traceability and that data needs to start from the design stage and carry through. So we use a QR system. So obviously every component, every cut piece gets QR coded. So then when if it goes through our rotary axis laser, that gets the QR code gets lasered on. If it goes through our Tiger Stock machine, the labels come off on it. Again, when it goes through an assembly, it's the same thing. The guys are scanning on, scanning off, so we're getting that real-time information. We also then now have that traceability coming back into the model to say, right, these components have now been cut, these components are now being in the welding bay or assembly bay. Now these components have now been fully assembled. Now the QA system is then used for our QR system is then used for our QA. So a quality assurance, and now it's being tested. Right now, it's ready to go. And that's all real-time information that we share with our client base as well. So it reduces the amount of phone calls and traffic flow. And if they want a particular set of sub-assemblies or components, then they can see where they are in the system, and they can actually, to a degree, change with the prioritization. So then we can then reshuffle that within our production. But there is limits on that because we don't want our clients to have too much control of throwing stuff forward and moving too much around, especially if it's going through some of the machining. So yeah, sure. That's one of the things we've had to develop ourselves, because a lot of the technologies are there or in development, or we've looked at a number of different softwares, but at the moment we're just playing with it internally. But yeah, we are always, our biggest investment this year by far has been in people in software development or from a design stage, and software itself. And I encourage anyone that's looking to progress that's really the road that they need to be looking at, especially when it comes to like standardization and productization. We were working in CAD, we were Revit, now we're in Inventor and SolidWorks. We are getting earlier and earlier and earlier in the design piece because of trying to design early on and make things that don't necessarily exist before, but to productize and standardize, that's where we sit.
Yeah, interesting. So what do you think is really the biggest opportunity for embracing prefab and modular?
One of the biggest things that I get asked, because we work, I work in my role, I work a lot with architects and builders and developers to try and look at that inclusion earlier on and educate them of what can be done within a building. But yeah, sorry, what was the question again? My brain.
It's early. What's the biggest opportunity in prefab and modular?
Oh yeah, so the people that I deal with from the top end of town, so architects, builders, and design consultants, the first question is, how much is it going to save? And the realism there is, with prefabrication, it's not necessarily cost saving. There can be elements that can make it cost neutral compared to conventional methods. But when we weigh up all the other factors of minimizing waste, we operate on lean manufacturing, not lean construction principles. I've studied both, and there are differences between the two. Lean manufacturing and lean construction aren't in sync with each other. They're different sets of principles, different methods.
What do you see as the big difference there?
I think some of the processes as regards lean manufacturing, as regards processes, is a lot more driven and a lot more focused in on, rather than lean construction. Lean construction is very much more about flow, whereas lean manufacturing is very much driven, and obviously in the 5 S's, the 7 wastes is very, very focused on within lean manufacturing. And the continuous improvement and the ability to change within a manufacturing environment is far, far greater than construction, because lean construction, you're moving from site to site. Every site is different. In lean manufacturing, you set up a factory, you set up cells, then you continuously can improve on that. So the data that comes out of lean manufacturing is far greater than lean construction. And going back to your question, when we talk about savings, we have far more traceability within a factory environment. So we have far higher safety standards, especially from my experience being working on sites. So we're working in confined spaces. Riser shafts are dangerous places to be. Well, we see people having to abseil into them to affix ductwork together and other components. We completely eliminate that. We built a 21-meter riser last year for a client that basically went up the entire central core of the building. It shaved months off the program. So while it was still cost saving to a degree, it was a small percentage of cost saving. The time saved on site, the elimination of having guys working in a riser shaft, and the amount of people on site installing it was far, far less. And then, believe it or not, a week after we installed that riser shaft, we had an earthquake here in Melbourne. So from a structural and seismic component, it was, they're nice and standing, and rigid, which was great, but that's what it was engineered for. Whereas conventionally, it's not really considered a lot. So if that had been damaged during an earthquake, if we do conventional, then you would be getting people back in there to check it and repair it. So that's just one example. But we talk about quality and time. I do say, and our data says that 1 week within a prefabrication facility is the equivalent to 3 weeks on site.
I believe that.
So yeah. So when we talk about time savings, that is there. The other thing is, as well, is our skill set. So we focus our skill set on the shop floor to what they're trained to do. So we do have skilled labor, but we also have general labor and trade assistants, and we have apprentices. So we're upskilling the industry by bringing people through. We have apprentices working on multiple valve sets, whereas on site, I've been an apprentice. They could just be sweeping the floor, making tea and taking deliveries. So we actually get TAFEs and colleges ask us to take people on because they need to build up their portfolio. So the apprentices sit at a workbench and build hundreds of these valve sets over a week, whereas on site, they'll be lucky to build one or two, in within a several month period. So the appeal to builders then and developers is that we are actually upskilling the industry, and it's the same with the trade unions as well. We encourage them to come here. We have full traceability on everything that we build, who's building it, how they're building it. So it ticks a lot of boxes for people, especially in a very tough environment at the moment with labor shortages.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm going to shift gears a bit. One of my favorite buzzwords is innovation. But when do you think that innovation really moves from that buzzword world and becomes practical in the job site?
I think we're starting to see it more and more with the generational changes of people on job sites, the adoption and the willing to adapt. When I first moved to Australia 10 years ago, and I was talking about prefabrication, the biggest thing that rung in my head was, who moved my cheese? It's that, you're taking lunch off my table, you're a threat. You seem to be disrupting everything.
Right.
And like anything, in order to change, you've got to be dissatisfied about something. So it was breaking down those barriers and saying, right, okay, well, why have you got a guy over there cutting pieces of metal with an angle grinder when I have a saw and I can cut it in one cut and cut it with a bundle? Could do a bundle cut. So that to them was innovative because they hadn't adopted certain thinking, I could get this done somewhere else a lot quicker in bulk. Even assembly, manufacturing and assembly, like the industry here in Australia, when I first moved to Australia, they didn't have a copper press system. So I introduced Vega, the copper press system, to Australia. That was where they were in their journey of innovation. And I've worked all over the world, and everyone's on a different journey and everyone's on a different skill set. And that's what, when I was talking earlier on about empowering and connecting construction, is whenever I work with anyone, I do a capability study on them. You know, they ask me for my capability statement. I do a capability study on them to see where they are in their journey. Because there's no point in just jumping ahead with technologies and, oh, we can do this and, oh, we can do that, because it will blow their mind. It's right, okay, here you are in the journey. These are all the things that can be achieved. And these are all the things that you can slowly adapt along that journey. Because, like, you know, it's teaching people to walk before they can run. And I see so many people that just go out and say, yeah, I want to go off and do this. And it fails, and then they turn around and say, well, why did it fail? And in a lot of honesty, when I've worked with people and they said, we've done prefabrication before, it cost us money, it didn't work out right, I you know, it, like, yeah, it just comes out of my mouth. I'm like, you did it wrong, you know. And it's the way that you did it, the systems, the processes, but it's also where you were in your journey and your understanding. So that adoption, that innovation to become normal, it's a different journey for everyone. And it's watching a race. You know, different people at different stages, and you have to, you know, you're only as strong as your weakest person, and it's like pulling that train along and pulling that field along. We'll never get up to everyone on par and on a level playing field. There are companies out there that are far more innovative and adaptive and adoptive than others. And I see that because we are starting to see more people come into our industries from different backgrounds, from technology backgrounds. You know, there are CEOs of big building companies now from IT and software backgrounds, and you know, so that's really good for our industry, because they're like, hang on a minute, there's got to be a better way. You know, this is so antiquated. You know, we're building like the Romans did. You know, where are we as regards innovation? So that is one good thing that I am seeing at the moment, is some of the people higher up the food chain and in some of these builders and global builders have started to change their ways and starting to lead the way.
Yeah. I love the kind of skill level set and evaluation concept of just figuring out where you are in the journey. It's not to shame or, you know, say that you're way behind, but just this is where you are. It's a reality. Here's the next step for you. Don't try to jump 10 steps ahead, because it's not going to work anyway, and you're going to be frustrated. And, you know, just take one step at a time. What's the next right thing for you?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, you know, the word modern methods of construction, you know, that can mean, you know, like I said very early on in the piece, that in 1996, there's a newspaper article from Crown House Technologies. Now, when I was doing my apprenticeship in 98, 99, well, through the years when I went there, they were still doing corridor modules. But I've got a copy of a newspaper article from 1996, corridor modules with all the services, the electric, the plumbing, the ventilation, everything in there. Now, that is still considered a modern method of construction within the industry, because of where people are on their adoption journey. So they see that as modern because they've not used it before. And when something's new, people are scared of it, you know. So I always say to people, that's why I do a capability study on them. Where are you on your journey? Because in order to me to assist you, I need to, you know, I don't want to go and blow your mind and just talk jargon. I've got engineers that do that for me, and I'll just say, well, it's gone over here, you know, I don't get it, you know. And I use Simon Sinek. You know, when I go and see new people, I use the expression, be the idiot. You know, raise your hand. If you don't know, just be the idiot. Because there's nothing far worse than going into a room of a load of people nodding, and then you walk away and half of them didn't get it. You know,
what did you say?
Yeah. So I always say to them, you be the idiot, because it's the only way you're going to learn. And you will get far more out of it when you start asking these questions. You start putting some of those insecurities aside again, because some people are scared of change. And I speak with contractors that, I made X amount of million last year. Why do I need to change? And I say, well, you might feel that you don't need to change now, but in 5 years, you'll be looking back and saying, that's when I should have changed. I should have started going along this journey, because my competitors are so far in front of me now. So it's a really, really important, people are planning for the future. We've already got issues within the industry. It's becoming, it's more and more of a buzzword as each day goes by. That's what's, I traveled the world keynote speaking. I was at Advancing Prefab. I do a lot of speaking about this. I'm sat here on a podcast talking about it. There's not many people around, but that have that full skill set. And that's why I'm out to on that mission, because I've got 20 years worth of knowledge now. I've set up another successful prefabrication facility, which is great. But I've also set up my competition, because I didn't want to be that one crazy guy in the corner banging a drum about prefabrication. I needed to start a bit of a movement. And now there are several other businesses here in Australia that do prefabrication of building services. Mm-hmm. And I helped set up some of those facilities based on there needed to be more people banging the drum. Now there's a bigger noise. It's bringing in more attention. It's bringing in more business for everyone. And there's enough there for everyone to have a good say. And we share work, we share insight, we share alliances as regards some of our design techniques or innovation in softwares, because we want to move at a good pace. There's no point in doing R&D and then finding out someone else has done the same sort of R&D, and you've both spent lots of money in researching areas. Why not work together on developing a system? So we've got things going on in the background with Autodesk Assemble. We've got different machinery that we've purchased that our alliance partners are looking at purchasing. We share how that information is working, just to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great, healthy mindset for sure. Well, how do people find out more information and connect with you?
Well, anyone can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to share obviously I'm a very easy person to find with an unusual surname of Wypior, spelled with a W. But people can find me on LinkedIn. They can go to our website. They can go to my website, which is neilwypior.com, or they can go to EVO-MEP, so evo-mep.com, and have a look at some of the work that we do. But yeah, my mission for the next couple of years is just to get out and educate and empower people and enable people. It doesn't matter where they are in their journey. We're helping architects right the way through to subcontractors. So and obviously we have facilities here to manufacture in Australia, but I'm helping a number of different companies throughout the world at the moment come up with concepts, come up with buildability, and come up with productization and standardization. So yeah, happy to help anyone wherever they are in their journey.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, final question for you. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation for me is all continuously moving forward. Continuously moving forward in and adopting technology along the way. Right now, that is the biggest thing for us, is moving forward in the adoption of technology. We've gone through this technological era of how far mobile phones have advanced over the last 20 years, and softwares have advanced over the last 20 years, but construction hasn't changed that much in the last 20 years. So how do we change it? And that is coming through things like automation, through machinery, through technology. We have people that don't want to work in a factory, but they will happily work on a computer, design a framing system, send it to a laser, and it be cut, and then they go down and see what they've designed sat on a machine. So we're having to adapt to the generations in front of us, and that is through innovation. So continuously moving forward and adopting things along the way. I use the expression, we're the kind of people that are in the queue for the next iPhone, rather than the people that are waiting 12 months to see what everyone else has experience with it. So that's the thing for innovation for us, is being the crazy people that camp out overnight and queue, ready for the next day when the new phones come out. So that's where we are in our innovation journey, of constantly researching, constantly investigating different ways and different technologies.
I love it. That's a great way to end it. Always be curious. I love it. Well, thanks so much, Neil, for waking up and coming on the show. Glad it worked out.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks for having me. It's been really, really, really good. And if anyone wants to reach out, feel free to get in contact with me.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Cheers, Todd. Thank you.